All right, welcome back to Blue by 90. I'm Justin, and I have a few special guests with me today from the Rivals. So they, not so friendly this week. It is Michigan State week, but I've got a couple Sparties that are joining us to preview the game. We've got Brendan Moore and Paul from Spartans Illustrated. They are staff writers over there. So go check out SpartansIllustrated.com. And take a look at their work. And we're here because this is Rivals for a Cause week. If you haven't seen it yet, go to rivalsforacause.com. We are raising funds for the Mott Children's Hospital. It's something that the North Peak Brewing Company has put forth an effort year after year. They're obviously our partner with Hale IPA. They also have a Sparta IPA. So they represent both sides. And we are working to raise funds for Mott Children's Hospital, which is connected to Sparrow Hospital in East Lansing as well. So trying to make this rivalry, even though there's a lot of hatred in it, trying to come together here for a good cause as well. So you can go to rivalsforacause.com and make sure that you donate. And whether you're green and white or maize and blue, it's all going to the children. So we appreciate all your support there. So Brendan, Paul, appreciate you guys for joining me here today.
Thanks for having us on.
Of course. So I don't know. So it's been a long, Paul, you said you're the self-appointed stats guy, analytics guy. I saw a stat out there. I can't remember exactly what it was. When was the last time that Michigan and Michigan State both were unranked in this game? Do you know that one offhand?
Off the top of my head, no. It might be 2012, but I'm just kind of making that up. Brandon, you look.
I think I saw 2009 on Twitter somewhere. I don't know. I don't remember who had the stat, but I think I saw it was 2009.
Yeah, I create my own rankings, so I don't care what other people rank to.
There you go. I like it. But I mean, unfortunately, not going to be the top 10 matchup that we had in 2021 or anything like that. And both teams have struggled and played well this year up to this point. I would say, after this past week, Michigan State beating Iowa is on the rise for sure. And Michigan, very much struggling. So it'll be interesting for sure to see how they go into this game. So I'll start with you guys, but I would have to imagine that you're feeling a lot better than you did to start the season going into this week, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Jonathan Smith, one thing he talked about, right from the get-go when he got hired at Michigan State, is this team is going to improve on a week-to-week basis. I remember week 1 against FAU. That was late August. We were coming out of that game that Michigan State won 16-10. There was a lot of turnovers. We were coming out of the game thinking, we don't know if this team's going to make a bowl. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of skepticism, to be honest. And then they go out next week, beat Maryland, played a really good game, still some turnover issues. And then had a tough loss against Boston College, still some turnover issues and such. And they're never going to beat Oregon or Ohio State. But I thought they looked really good coming out of the bye week against Iowa. They looked like they were a team that was well prepared, that they won the bye week, which they constantly stressed throughout that off period. As we got to win the bye week, we got to prepare for Iowa really well. We know what they're going to do. They're going to want to run the football. I thought they were well coached in that game. They were well prepared. I do think this team still has room to improve, which could possibly raise some concern for Michigan fans here.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Brendan. I think, as you said, that a little bit of a rough start to the season, then they seem to be building. They had a tough loss at Boston College in a game they frankly should have won. They had a bad interception at the end, or I think our young freshman Aiden Childs kind of panicked and just sort of almost trucked a Hail Mary into the end zone when he really didn't need to. And then actually in the first half of the Ohio State game, Michigan State actually moved the ball very effectively against the Buckeyes for 4 straight drives. Now the problem is they only got one touchdown out of it. They kept having turnovers, but they could have very easily had a lead going into halftime of that game. After that, in the second half, the wheels fell off, and then they flew out to Oregon, 2,000 miles away, and they just got rolled. I mean, they looked uncompetitive in that game against Oregon. And so it was a question of, which version of the Spartans is the real team? Was it the first half against Ohio State, or is that what we saw against Oregon, what we're going to see for the rest of the season? And I think, as a very pleasant surprise, they came out against Iowa looking very, very sharp. Again, moving the ball against a very good defense consistently. They didn't punt a single time against Iowa, and they only had one turnover. So, the concern is still they got 6 field goals, which means they're not quite getting all the way to the end zone.
Yeah, but moving the ball that well and not having to punt against an Iowa defense is still pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, it was and they showed surprisingly good rush defense, which I think is going to be another key this week. They did let out a late 75-yard scamper from Iowa's very talented running back. That's a concern because they kept that bottled up the whole game, and then in the fourth quarter they let one go. That'll be a good stat to watch because I think Michigan's run offense has also been explosive from time to time. But some of the mistakes we saw early in the season we're not seeing now, or at least we're seeing them in a greatly diminished form. So that's very encouraging.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think it's one of those things that I think fans just in general in sports have a hard time being patient, right? Being patient. It's automatic, and that's been the same for Michigan fans as well. You saw what Sherrone Moore was able to do in 2023 for Michigan when he stepped in for Jim Harbaugh, against Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State to end the year. I think a lot of fans just said, they thought, okay, he's just going to come in and do that, and we're going to build. And, even though you lose Jim Harbaugh, you lose the entire offense and you lose the entire defensive staff, like, we're just going to keep building. And that's not what happened. And so I think, you guys mentioned, Brendan, you mentioned just trying to get better week after week. That has not been what Michigan has been doing. In fact, it seems like they've regressed in a lot of ways throughout the year, which I think is most of Michigan fans like cause for concern. If we were just losing games because, hey, we lost everybody, our best coach maybe of all time, left for the NFL, lost our top 10, QB, lost one of the best running backs in program history, I'd say, okay, I'm fine with that. But you still have a lot of talent, in this, on this Michigan team. And you're struggling, because of, penalties. You're struggling because of turnovers, just mental mistakes, different things like that. So I think that's why everyone's, has a cause of concern for Michigan. So coming from you guys too, going into this, what would be, Paul, you mentioned the run game. I have to imagine this is it, but what's your biggest concern about Michigan going into this team, saying, all right, hey, we're going to really struggle against that part of Michigan's game?
I think it's the run game. When you look at Michigan, I think they have a really strong interior defensive line, Mason Graham and all them. So I think establishing a run game is something that Michigan State was not able to do against Oregon and not really against Ohio State, something that they really struggled with, and kind of force the ball out of Aiden Child's hands a little bit because he is prone to making some mistakes here and there. I know he only had one pick against Iowa, right, and he's only had one pick in the last 2 games, which is promising, but he still makes some of those shaky throws. There was one incompletion that it fell right through an Iowa defensive back's hand, so he really should have had 2 picks. So I think Michigan State having a balanced offense, getting that run game going, I think that's going to be the key in this football game. Biggest concern from Michigan State perspective has got to be getting that run game going against a strong Michigan interior.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I did mention the run defense, which I think will be important, and I think the Spartans will, be up to the task much of the time. But again, it only takes 1 or 2 plays for the game to get away from you. And I think also just Aiden Child's decision making. Brendan touched on this, but if he can come out of the game with 1 interception or less, I think the Spartans have a very good chance. But also just the pressure that Michigan's D-line can put on Childs. He is very much a dual threat, and he is a very elusive runner. But if he doesn't have a lot of time to throw, that can unravel any offense. So those would be my additional concerns.
Yeah, Paul, I would agree with that. I think the key to Michigan stopping Michigan State's offense is if Wink Martindale can, and he hasn't really proven this yet, to be honest, but if he can, allow Kenneth Graham, Mason Graham, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore to just say, all right, we're going to drop our linebackers in secondary. We'll cover that. Let those guys get after Aiden Childs. I think if they can get to the QB without having to blitz a ton, I do think that changes the game for Michigan because, with a young quarterback who is, turnover prone, has had trouble with decision making, obviously improving, but still, having trouble at times. This is what Michigan's D-line defense did to Jalen Milroe in the Rose Bowl last year, right? It was they got after him, and Jalen Milroe had no time, didn't know what to do. That's what you want to see if you're a Michigan fan in this game is, all right, let's get to Aiden Childs early, have the crowd into it, have him come into an opposing stadium, first time in a Michigan State game and say, all right, hey, welcome to the show a little bit, but we're going to be after you all day long. I think that's for sure what Michigan's defense is going to try to do. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, gosh, hard to say. It feels like, you mentioned Iowa. It's hard to say, hey, Michigan's offense is looking worse than Iowa's offense right now. That's a tough thing to come out of my mouth as a Michigan fan currently. But that's the truth. And, Sherrone Moore even said this week he doesn't, fully know who's going to be the quarterback. It sounds like Jack Tuttle is the leader in the clubhouse right now to start still on Saturday, despite having some struggles versus, really in the past few games that he's played. So I think that, I do think that Michigan's got to just say, hey, Kalel Mullings is a dog, and we need to give it to him and just pound it and keep doing that. And I think, Paul, to your point about the late run from Iowa, I wonder if Michigan's offensive line can just continue to pound and wear them down and break one open at some point.
Yeah, that's certainly possible.
One of the big surprises for me this season is Michigan State's interior defensive line and just the defense, like the front seven in general, because Michigan State lost two of their best players on the D line in the spring in the transfer portal. Simeon Barrow went to Miami. Derek Harmon's at Oregon, killing it over there. But I'm been surprised at how well they've played. They play aggressive. They pursue the football really well, game tackling, all that good stuff. So Michigan's going to have their hands full kind of on offense. I know that it's pretty obvious to say, considering how they've looked throughout the year. But I think Tuttle would probably be the guy I would go with if I was Sherrone Moore, if I was Michigan. I just think his ability with his arm kind of gives you a little bit something different than Orji, because with Orji they're not going to throw it very often. So I think Tuttle have at least a slight threat with his arm, and then Mullings I think is a really good back. So I mean he's probably going to turn the ball over maybe once, maybe twice. I do think we're going to see a fair amount of turnovers in this game, probably combined 3, 4, maybe even 5. So
yeah, I think the other factor that could be interesting. I mean, Michigan's last 2 losses did both come on the road. And that was after starting, I believe, 5 home games in a row.
Yep.
And so the chance to come home is always a chance to regroup. And while, the Spartans have played quite a few road games, especially they've had a lot of travel actually already so far this year. They're kind of used to that road game night environment. But, the emotional side of this is always, complex, very important, and hard to predict.
Totally.
And if you think about, beating Iowa was a big step for the Spartans because, just getting to 6 wins in a bowl game was a big goal. And now with the schedule breaking out, we still have games against Purdue and against Rutgers, who's kind of, flailing right now. So getting to 6 wins seems very achievable. And so is there that subtle kind of deep breath of like, we kind of got over the hump. Whereas Michigan, now they're kind of fighting for their lives. The remaining schedule for the Wolverines is very challenging. And I think, they're probably going to be double-digit underdogs in at least 3 games at Indiana being a double-digit underdog. And
yeah,
we believe that, but I think that's possible, if not likely. And so how does that emotional aspect factor in? If Michigan comes in the hungrier team, then that'll obviously play very much into their favor.
Yeah, I think it's tough because, a year ago, this team is, rolling onto, they didn't, obviously they faced adversity in each game, but they never had their backs against the wall like they do right now. And it's like, I think it's tough to go from being on top of the world to all of a sudden being like, hey, we might not make a bowl game. And it's tough to rally the troops. I think that when you're in Michigan State's position where it's, hey, we already saw rock bottom last year. We only know we can only go up here and we're going to build and build and build. Whereas Michigan saw, the absolute ceiling and it's dropping, right? And so those two things, to your point, Paul, mentally are I think for Michigan, it's really tough to deal with. And when you have guys, now I'm not saying they're doing this, but I think it's a tendency of college athletes to say, all right, you've got a guy in Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson that are going to be first round draft picks next year. It's pretty easy once you go 4-3 to start looking at, all right, the draft looks really good. I'm going to make $30 million or whatever it is in 6 months. I already got my natty ring, right? So I accomplished what I wanted to, when I decided to commit to Michigan. So I think to your point, it's, can Michigan rally the troops and say, hey, we want to salvage something out of this season? And maybe beating Michigan State can be one of those things that says, hey, at least we have Paul Bunyan, right? At least that's something that we can hang our hat on for that season. Because I do think that, to be honest, there's pressure on Michigan right now. This is a win-win for Michigan State, in my opinion, right? You were never supposed to win this game going into the season. You weren't even, it was like a 24-point spread to start the year or something like that.
That's
right. So I think that, Michigan State's going into this like, we've got nothing to lose. If we go into Michigan and beat them, a year removed from winning a natty, like we're already on a good projection for the Jonathan Smith era. Whereas Michigan's like, it's a can't lose game because of, embarrassment, I guess is the best word to put it, because like, you don't want to be that team that loses to MSU when you have a natty ring that's still in the, still fresh in the box from 9 months ago.
Yeah, I think we're going to find way more about Michigan this week than we will about Michigan State. How is this team going to respond when their back is right up against that wall, right? They're 4-3 coming off national championship. You guys alluded to it. Not going to beat a dead horse, but I think we're going to find out a lot more about Michigan this week, see how they respond. And another factor is Will Johnson going to play? I mean, he's questionable. Shramore said it, I think, a couple of days ago. So he's questionable. He's one of those future NFL players on Michigan's defense. And I do think Michigan in general, they have more top-end NFL talent than Michigan State on their roster. So I think those guys got to rise up and play really well for this Michigan team. And if they do that, I think Michigan has a better chance at winning, obviously. But Will Johnson is going to be a key because Michigan State, they do have some playmakers at wide receiver. We talked Nick Marsh. He's been really good this year as a true freshman. So Will Johnson playing for Michigan, that's another key.
Yep, absolutely. And I am glad, Josh, that you put it on the record that beating Michigan State will either make or break Michigan's entire season. So thank you for finally admitting that. That's nice to hear.
I mean, at this point, first of all, I'm not one of those people that says like the Michigan State rivalry doesn't matter. Like, no, those people are the dumbest people on Twitter on earth, because it obviously matters. There's no doubt that it matters. Is it still, at least the last 3 years, was it secondary to the Ohio State rivalry? Yes, because that game did in the last 3 years make or break Michigan and Ohio State seasons, right? And ultimately, you can care a lot about both games, right? I still think it's funny because the Michigan-Ohio State game being at the end of the year, a lot of times does determine a lot of things. But with the Michigan State game always being around this time, about midway through the season, it does determine the trajectory for a lot of seasons for both teams, right? If you win this game, you're, sometimes battling for the Big Ten championship. If you lose it, you're out of the race, right? And vice versa. And I think that, just in general, this rivalry has been, it has been more like the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry has been like, all right, who's the top dog in the Big Ten, at least in the last 3 years, right? Before that, we all know it was a decade of without Michigan beating them. But for the Michigan State, it's been back and forth. It's been 5-5 in the last decade, right? So it's neck and neck. And it's funny because some of those are blowout wins. Some of those are 2021, right? So it's it definitely is interesting, but I think that I do think that Michigan State fans, I don't want to get not canceled for this. I don't want to get dogged for this by Michigan State fans, but I think Michigan State fans care about this rivalry more than Michigan fans. Is that fair to say, or is that going to get me into some trouble?
I don't think it'll get you into some trouble. I think Michigan is on a higher, this rivalry is on a higher priority list for Michigan State than it is Michigan, because Michigan obviously has that rivalry with Ohio State. We know how nationally significant that has been over the past few years. So I think in terms of priorities, I think this rivalry is on a higher priority higher on the priority list for Michigan State.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all realize that not all teams need to view rivalries the same way, but I think there's tends to be a tendency among some Michigan fans to use that idea that Ohio State's really the only rivalry that matters is kind of an emotional crutch for the 50% of the time that you haven't come out on top in the last 25 years.
That's for sure. I think, for me, if we had gone 8-2 over the past decade or something like that, then you can say, okay, this rivalry doesn't matter, quote unquote, if you're a Michigan fan. But when it's neck and neck and, we're 2 years removed from both it was a top 10 game playing for the Big Ten, right? And so it's crazy to me to think that. I think that I'm also a guy from Grand Rapids where there are a lot of Sparties in Grand Rapids. So like it was growing up, the Michigan State rivalry was bigger to me than Michigan Ohio State, especially because, me growing up, like if, Michigan didn't beat Ohio State that often. Right. So I'm not one of those guys that's going to say, this rivalry, it doesn't matter. Ohio State's our real rival, blah, blah, blah. They can both be big rivals. They both are big rivals. And this game does mean a lot. I think this game has recruiting implications. I also think for Jonathan Smith, if he comes in and beats Michigan in year one, he has the backing of every Michigan State fan, no matter if you lose the rest of your games for the rest of the year, right? You have to do that, and I wish, honestly, and I hope that it's like this way, that I hope that Michigan at some point realizes, like, you need to take this rivalry so seriously that it's like, we're never going to lose that game. We're never going to lose that game to Michigan State. We're going to own the rivalry. And then, that really, you have to start there, and then that can springboard you to higher, things. But you have to, Jim Harbaugh always said it. You have to beat the state schools, Michigan State, Penn State, and Ohio State. Those are the three keys to winning the Big Ten. Now, obviously, you bring in Oregon to the fold, so things are a little bit different in the Big Ten. But no, this rivalry, I'll leave it at that. This rivalry matters 100%.
Absolutely. I can't wait for Saturday. It matters for both teams. So really excited.
Absolutely. So yeah, appreciate you guys coming on. If you're a Sparty fan watching this, please go to SpartansIllustrated.com and check out Paul and Brendan's stuff. They're staff writers over there. They've got a great crew and put out great content. And then, if you have the means, please go to rivalsforacause.org. I screwed it up in the first to read. So rivalsforacause.org, please head over there and donate to Mott Children's Hospital, and head to North Peak Brewing, head to Pretzel Bell in Ann Arbor, head to Jolly Pumpkin in East Lansing. They are donating this week $1 from each purchase of Hale IPA and Sparta IPA to Mott Children's Hospital. So we appreciate everyone's support. Brendan, Paul, appreciate you guys coming on, and looking forward to Saturday. We'll also be at Pretzel Bell on Friday night, right? So we'll be there doing a live podcast with both Blue by 90 and the Spartans Illustrated guys. So come out there, and whether you're wearing green or wearing blue, please come out and hang out with us, have a beer, and everything will go to a good cause. So appreciate you guys coming on, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.